I was 6 months pregnant when my husband's former mistress set my house on fire. The smell of smoke was the first thing that woke me that night. It wasn't the crackling of flames devouring the living room curtains, nor the shattering of glass bursting from the heat. It was that penetrating, dense aroma that slipped under my bedroom door like a venomous serpent slithering towards my bed. I opened my eyes in the darkness, and for a second that seemed eternal, I didn't understand what was happening. My hand traveled instinctively towards my swollen belly, towards that life growing inside me with 6 months of woven hopes in every nocturnal kick. I was 32 years old. I was pregnant with my first child, and someone had decided that that night, both he and I had to die. But before I tell you how I escaped the flames, before I explain how my entire world was reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes, I need you to understand how I got to that moment. I need you to know Rodrigo, the man who swore to love me until death did us part, without mentioning that death could come at the hands of his past. I need you to know who I was before I became the woman who had to crawl across the floor of her own home, with smoke burning her lungs, begging God for her baby to survive. This is my story, and I warn you, it is not pretty. It has no fairy tale endings or easy redemptions. It is raw, it is painful, and it is absolutely real. I met Rodrigo at my cousin Fernanda's wedding, exactly 4 years ago. I had gone alone, as always. At 28, I had already resigned myself to being the family spinster, the one the aunts looked at with pity, while whispering that my time was running out, that if I kept being so picky, I would end up an old maid. I remember I was wearing a navy blue dress that had cost me 3 months of savings, heels that tortured my feet but made my legs look a mile long, and a smile rehearsed in front of the mirror for hours so no one would notice how alone I felt in the midst of so much celebration for others. The reception was at a ranch 40 kilometers from the city, a beautiful place surrounded by ancient trees and gardens that seemed taken from a wedding magazine. The tables were decorated with white flowers and candles that flickered softly in the spring night breeze. The temperature was perfect, about 22 degrees that made everything feel magical, unreal. And then I saw him. He was standing by the bar, with a drink in his hand, and that half-smile that I would later learn to recognize as his most lethal weapon. Tall, almost 6'3", with dark hair slightly disheveled and green eyes that seemed capable of reading your soul. He wore a gray suit that fit him as if it had been sewn directly onto his body, and when our eyes met, I felt the ground beneath my feet tremble. I'm not one to believe in love at first sight. I always thought it was a ridiculous concept, invented by cheap soap opera writers to justify stupid decisions. But that night, when Rodrigo walked towards me with that confidence only possessed by men who know exactly the effect they have, I understood why people do crazy things for love. "Shall we dance?" he asked me, without even introducing himself first. His voice was deep, profound, the kind of voice that makes you think of tangled sheets and secrets whispered in the dark. I should have said no. I should have made up some silly excuse about uncomfortable heels or promises made to non-existent friends, but I nodded, like a hypnotized idiot, and let him guide me to the dance floor. That night we danced for hours. He told me he was an architect, that he was 35, that he had come to the wedding because he was friends with the groom from university. He made me laugh with absurd stories about projects that had gone wrong, asked me about my dreams with a curiosity that seemed genuine, and when he finally kissed me under the stars, with the sound of live music in the background, I thought I had found my person. What I didn't know was that Rodrigo had a past that walked on 6-inch heels, had bleached blonde hair and eyes the color of resentment, and answered to the name of Valentina. Our relationship was like a beautiful hurricane. 3 months after we met, Rodrigo asked me to move in with him at his downtown apartment. It was a beautiful place, 120 square meters, with huge windows that let in the morning light, dark hardwood floors, and a terrace with a mountain view. I felt like I was living someone else's life, someone more sophisticated, more elegant, more deserving of so much beauty. I left my small 40 square meter apartment without thinking twice. I also left my job as an elementary school teacher at a public school, because Rodrigo insisted I didn't need to work, that he earned enough for both of us, that my only job should be to be happy. At the time it seemed romantic to me. Now I understand it was the first trap. We got married a year later, in an intimate ceremony with just 50 guests. My dress was simple but beautiful. a mermaid cut with French lace that had belonged to my grandmother. Rodrigo cried when he saw me walk down the aisle, and I thought those tears were of pure happiness. It never occurred to me that they could be of guilt. The first 2 years of marriage were idyllic, or at least that's what I believed. Rodrigo worked a lot, sometimes coming home past 10 at night, exhausted and smelling of cold coffee and stress. But he always kissed me when he arrived, always asked about my day, always found time on weekends to take me to breakfast at that cafe I liked so much, 3 kilometers from downtown, where they served the best croissants in the city. I dedicated myself to creating a home. I decorated every corner of the apartment with obsessive love, choosing cushions and curtains and paintings that reflected our life together. I learned to cook elaborate dishes to surprise him when he got home from work. I signed up for yoga classes, painting classes, Italian classes, anything to fill the empty hours while I waited for his return. I didn't realize I was losing myself. I didn't notice that the independent woman I had been was fading like a photograph exposed too long to the sun, until she became just a pale reflection of who I once was. And I definitely didn't see the signs that something was very wrong. The first time he suspiciously disappeared was 3 months before I got pregnant. It was an ordinary Saturday. I had made breakfast and was waiting for him in bed with a tray of eggs, Benedict, and freshly squeezed orange juice. But Rodrigo wasn't by my side. I got up confused, looked in the bathroom, the kitchen, the terrace. Nothing. His car wasn't in the parking lot either. I looked at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. It was only 8 in the morning on a Saturday, and my husband had vanished without a trace. He returned 4 hours later, smelling of women's perfume and with an excuse so pathetic, I'm ashamed to have believed it. An emergency client, he said, without looking me in the eye, had a problem with his house plans and needed me urgently. On a Saturday at 8 in the morning? You know how rich clients are, love. They think they can have you whenever they want. I nodded. I swallowed the lump in my throat along with all the questions I should have asked. And I moved on, because that's what devoted wives do. We ignore. We forgive. We convince ourselves we're seeing ghosts where there are none. After that day, the disappearances became more frequent. Rodrigo started working later, having more urgent meetings on weekends, receiving calls he answered quietly on the terrace, while I pretended not to notice how his shoulders tensed every time he looked at the screen. His cell phone became forbidden territory. Before he left it lying around without a care, but suddenly he started carrying it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. He changed the 4-digit password I knew for a longer, more complex one, and when I asked him why, he accused me of being paranoid. "What's wrong, don't you trust me?" he asked me that night, with a mix of pain and indignation that made me feel like the worst wife in the world. "Of course I trust you," I lied. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." And there I was again, apologizing for having correct intuitions, for sensing that something was very, very wrong in my marriage. That's when I found out I was pregnant. The pregnancy test showed 2 bright pink lines at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in August. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it in the sink. I had been feeling strange for weeks. Morning sickness, I attributed to anxiety, a fatigue no coffee could overcome, and breast tenderness I ignored as a premenstrual symptom. But there was the truth, irrefutable, holding it between my trembling fingers. I was going to be a mother. Tears sprang from my eyes uncontrollably. They were tears of joy, yes, but also of fear, of a deep terror I didn't dare name. Because part of me, the part I had been ignoring for months, knew that bringing a child into a marriage that was crumbling in silence was madness. But I decided to ignore that voice. As always. I planned the reveal for days. I bought a tiny yellow onesie because we didn't know the sex yet, wrapped it in an elegant box, and prepared a special dinner for Friday night. Rodrigo had promised to be home early, although by that point his promises were worth less than the paper he never wrote them on. That night, when he finally walked through the door at 9:30, 2 hours after agreed, I handed him the box with sweaty hands, and my heart beating 1,000 times a minute. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "Open it." I watched him unwrap the paper with a slowness that seemed unbearable. I watched him take out the tiny onesie and stare at it for several seconds, processing the information, and I watched him turn pale, as if he had just received the worst news of his life. Are you pregnant?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," I replied, with a smile that felt increasingly forced. "We're going to be parents." Rodrigo didn't hug me. He didn't kiss me. He didn't shout for joy or lift me in the air as I had imagined so many times. Instead, he sat on the sofa, ran his hands through his hair, and muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "This can't be happening." "Aren't you happy?" I asked, feeling my heart crack. "Of course I am," he said, finally getting up to hug me. It's a lot of information. Forgive me, I'm in shock." That night we made love, but it felt different, distant, as if Rodrigo were there physically but his mind wandered somewhere else, with someone else. It wasn't until 3 months later that I discovered exactly where he had been wandering. Her name was Valentina Marquez, 30 years old, bottle blonde, with a gym-sculpted body and a face that seemed straight out of an Instagram filter. I found her by accident, in the stupidest and most cliché way possible, checking my husband's phone while he was showering. I know what you're thinking, that I violated his privacy, that I had no right, that if I didn't trust him I should have talked instead of spying. And you're right, but after months of lies, of inexplicable disappearances, of feeling like a crazy person, for suspecting what my instinct was screaming at me, I needed to know the truth, even if that truth destroyed me. And boy did it. The messages were explicit, not only physically explicit, but emotionally devastating. Rodrigo said things to that woman he had never said to me. He talked to her about a future together, about plans to run away somewhere far, about how trapped he felt in his marriage. "My wife is a good person," he had written just a week before, "but I don't love her. Not like I love you." It was never like that with her. 3 years of marriage reduced to that phrase. It was never like that with her. I felt the floor open beneath my feet, that everything I thought I knew, everything I thought was real, was crumbling like a sandcastle swept away by the tide. I was 4 months pregnant with the man who had been cheating on me since before I existed in his life, because that's what the oldest messages said. His relationship with Valentina had been going on for years. It had started before he met me, had continued during our relationship, had persisted after our wedding. I was never the chosen one. I was the screen. The respectable facade he needed to please his traditional family, to project the image of the successful architect with the perfect wife and enviable life. Valentina, according to the messages, was from a humble family. She had worked as a waitress at the restaurant Rodrigo frequented with clients, and that's where it all started. He had seduced her with promises of a better future, with expensive gifts, with secretly paid trips. He had rented them an apartment 15 kilometers from ours. He paid her bills. He had made her his official mistress while I played happy wife. What destroyed me the most wasn't the lies. It was the little truths hidden among them. The details that fit perfectly into the gaps in my memory. That work trip to Europe he took last year. The one supposedly for an architecture conference. He had gone with her. The nights he came home late smelling of perfume. It was her perfume. The engagement ring he gave me, the one I showed off with so much pride, was identical to one he had given Valentina first. I vomited. Right there, in the bathroom where Rodrigo was still showering, unaware that his world was also about to collapse. I vomited all the pain, all the rage, all the betrayal my body couldn't contain. And when he came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, asking me if I was okay, I looked at him with completely new eyes. I no longer saw the man I had fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, a liar, a coward who hadn't had the guts to choose one life or the other, and who instead had condemned us all to live half-lives. "I know about Valentina," I said, with a calmness that surprised even me. The color left his face. His eyes widened with a terror that confirmed everything I had read, and in that moment I knew my marriage, that fairy tale I had worked so hard to keep alive, had died. What followed were the 3 longest hours of my life. Rodrigo denied everything at first, as liars do when caught red-handed, that the messages were old, that they didn't mean anything anymore, that Valentina was a thing of the past. But when I showed him the photos she had sent him just that morning, photos that leave no room for interpretation, his mask fell definitively. Then came the excuses, that he was confused, that he never meant to hurt me, that it was her fault for not leaving him alone, that he loved me, that I was his wife, that the baby changed everything. "The baby changes everything?" I screamed, with a fury I didn't know I possessed. "You've been cheating on me for years. Years. And now that I'm going to have your child, suddenly everything is different? Please, love, we can fix this. Don't call me love. You have no right to call me love. That night I slept in the guest room, with the door locked and a chair blocking the handle just in case. Not because I was afraid of Rodrigo physically, but because I couldn't stand the idea of having him near. His mere presence made me nauseous more intensely than any pregnancy symptom. The next day, while he was at work, I made 2 calls. The first was to my mother, to whom I told everything between sobs while she cried on the other end of the line, more than 500 kilometers away, cursing Rodrigo with words I had never heard her use. The second was to a divorce lawyer, recommended by a friend who had been through something similar. The lawyer, a 50-year-old woman with hard eyes and a firm voice, explained my options with a clarity I appreciated amidst so much chaos. I could start the divorce process immediately, but being pregnant, things got complicated. We would have to establish custody, child support, visitation. Everything became a million times more difficult when there was a child involved. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked me, looking at me fixedly. "Many women in your situation decide to stay at least until the baby is born." "I can't stay," I replied without hesitation. "I can't raise my child watching his mother swallow her pride every day to maintain a farce." That afternoon, when Rodrigo returned from work with a bouquet of red roses and the expression of a beaten puppy, I informed him that I had contacted a lawyer and wanted a divorce. His reaction surprised me. There were no screams, no desperate pleas, no promises of change, just a resigned nod, as if he had been expecting this moment, as if deep down he knew it was inevitable. "And the baby?" he asked, in a defeated voice. "You'll be his father. That won't change. But you will no longer be my husband." What I didn't know, what neither of us could foresee, was that Valentina wasn't going to accept this resolution so peacefully, because in her twisted mind, I was to blame for everything. I was the one who had appeared to ruin her perfect relationship with Rodrigo. I was the one who had to disappear. And she was going to make sure of it. The following weeks were a bureaucratic and emotional hell. Rodrigo moved to a hotel while we looked for a way to divide our lives, intertwined for 3 years. The apartment remained in my name temporarily, a decision he accepted without protest, probably drowning in guilt. My pregnancy progressed despite the stress. At 5 months, ultrasounds showed a healthy baby, a little boy who moved constantly, as if to remind me I had something to keep fighting for. I gave him a name before he was born. Mateo. It meant gift of God, and in the midst of so much darkness, that's exactly what he represented to me. It was during this period that I started receiving the messages. The first arrived on my Instagram, from an account with no profile picture and a generic name. It just said, "Whore, he never loved you." I deleted it without giving it importance. I thought it was some random troll, maybe some follower of Rodrigo's who had found out about our separation and wanted to cause drama. But the messages continued, increasingly frequent, increasingly disturbing. "Do you think that baby will save you? He chose me. It was always me. You should be careful. Pregnant women are so vulnerable. I see your building. I know where you live. I know you're alone." I contacted the police after the 10th message. A board officer took my statement and explained that they couldn't do anything unless there was a direct, verifiable threat. Vague words didn't count. They needed proof, concrete evidence that someone planned to harm me. "Ma'am, it's probably just a resentful ex trying to scare you," he told me condescendingly. "Block the account and try not to worry. Stress isn't good for the baby." I wanted to scream that stress was all I knew lately, that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight in weeks, that every shadow on the street seemed like a threat, but I held back, because what was the point? The police weren't going to protect me. No one was going to protect me except myself. I changed the apartment locks, installed a security camera at the door, stopped posting on social media, stopped uploading photos that revealed my location. I became a prisoner in my own home, trapped between 4 walls while I waited for the storm to pass. But the storm wasn't passing. It was just beginning. At 5.5 months pregnant, I had my first and only face-to-face encounter with Valentina. I had gone out for a walk in the park near the apartment, a desperate attempt to get fresh air and escape the walls that felt increasingly suffocating. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, with tree leaves turning golden and reddish hues, and a soft breeze carrying the scent of damp earth. The temperature was pleasant, about 18 degrees, that made walking almost pleasurable despite my growing belly. I was sitting on a bench, resting my swollen feet, when I saw her approaching. At first I didn't recognize her. Her appearance was different from the photos I had seen on Rodrigo's phone. The blonde hair now had dark roots showing, the impeccable makeup had been replaced by deep dark circles, and her body seemed thinner, almost fragile. But her eyes were unmistakable. They burned with an intensity that chilled my blood. "Are you Elena?" she asked, standing in front of me with her arms crossed. My heart began to beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked around for people, witnesses, anyone who could help me if the situation turned violent. There were a few people about 50 meters away, close enough to hear me scream, I hoped. "You're Valentina." It wasn't a question. She let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Well, so the coward Rodrigo finally told you about me. I wondered how long it would take." "It wasn't him who told me about you," I replied, trying to keep my voice firm. "I found the messages." Her expression changed for a second, a flash of something that could have been shame, before hardening again. "And now what? Did you come to confront me? To tell me I stole your husband?" "I didn't come for anything. I was sitting here quietly until you appeared." "Quietly," she repeated mockingly. "Of course. Sitting here with your little belly playing the innocent victim while I lost everything." I got up from the bench, instinctively placing my hands over my belly in a protective gesture. "I'm not having this conversation with you. Whatever happened between you and Rodrigo has nothing to do with me." "Nothing to do with you?" Her eyes filled with tears, but not of sadness, of rage. "You took him from me. We had been together for 3 years. He promised me he would leave everything for me, and then you appeared with your good girl face and your fancy dresses, and suddenly I became the other woman." "I didn't know you existed," I told her, feeling the nausea return. "He lied to me too." "But you stayed, you married him, and now you're going to have his child while I have nothing." A couple of people passing by looked at us curiously, probably sensing the tension. Valentina seemed to realize she was making a scene and lowered her voice, but the intensity of her words didn't diminish. "I'm going to make you pay for this," she whispered, coming so close I could smell her perfume, that same perfume I had smelled so many times on Rodrigo's clothes. "I don't know how or when, but I promise you'll regret getting in my way." And she left, leaving me trembling in the middle of the park, with my heart racing and the absolute certainty that this woman was capable of anything. After the encounter in the park, I intensified security measures. I told Rodrigo what had happened, and to his credit, he seemed genuinely concerned. He offered to hire private security, pay for a more sophisticated alarm system, even move me to another place temporarily, but I refused everything. I wasn't going to flee my own life because of someone else's madness. I wasn't going to live like a fugitive in my own city. Besides, where would I go? My mother lived too far away, and the idea of starting over in an unknown place, pregnant and alone, seemed more terrifying than facing Valentina. Mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. The messages stopped after our encounter, which should have seemed more ominous to me than it did at the time. Instead, I convinced myself that our conversation had scared her, that she had realized she was taking things too far, that she had decided to move on with her life and leave me alone. How naive I was. The last 3 weeks before the fire were strangely calm. My divorce was progressing slowly but steadily. Rodrigo and I had reached a friendly agreement on most matters. He would give me a generous amount of alimony and child support for the baby. I would keep the apartment at least until Mateo was a year old, and we would share custody equally once the child was old enough. I started preparing the baby's room. I painted the walls a soft sky blue, assembled the crib my mother had sent from her city, hung mobiles of stars and moons over where my son would sleep. For the first time in months, I began to feel something resembling hope. Maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The night of the fire, I went to sleep at 11, after watching a romantic movie on TV that made me cry like a baby. The pregnancy hormones had turned me into an emotional wreck, and anything made me cry. Diaper commercials, cheesy songs, even the weather. That night, it was raining softly. The sound of drops against the window was lulling, almost hypnotic. I fell asleep thinking about Mateo, about what it would be like to hold him for the first time, the smell of his little head, the feeling of his tiny hands gripping my finger. I dreamed of a future where it was just him and me against the world, where the pain of the past was left behind and we began a new life. I had no idea that, at that very moment, at 2 a.m, a shadow was walking down the hallway outside my apartment, with a can of gasoline in her hands, and madness shining in her eyes. The smell of smoke woke me at 2:43 in the morning. I know because I looked at the clock on my nightstand just before panic took hold of me, just before my life changed forever. At first I thought I was dreaming. The smoke was coming under my bedroom door like a dense, dark fog, and in my sleepy state I couldn't process what was happening. But then I heard the crackling of flames, that unmistakable sound of something devouring, consuming, destroying. I got out of bed so fast I got dizzy. My 6-month belly made every movement more difficult, slower, clumsier. I walked to the door and touched it. It was hot. Not boiling, but hot enough to know there was fire on the other side. The terror I felt at that moment is impossible to describe. It wasn't just for me. It was for him, for Mateo, for that life I carried inside, and that depended completely on my decisions in the next few minutes. If I made a mistake, if I did something wrong, we would both die. I vaguely remembered something I had read about fires. Don't open hot doors, look for another exit, stay low because smoke rises. My room had a window that led to the emergency staircase, something I had never been so grateful for in my life. With trembling hands, I ran to the window and opened it. The cold night air came in like a blessing, filling my lungs with something other than smoke. Outside, I could see the city lights, the neighboring buildings asleep, the rain still falling softly as if nothing extraordinary were happening. I went out the window with a difficulty that almost cost me my life. My belly got stuck in the frame. I had to contort myself in ways I didn't know I could, ignoring the pain in my back, my hips, every inch of my body that protested against the effort. The emergency staircase was slippery from the rain. The metal steps seemed designed to make me fall. But I didn't fall. Step by step, rung by rung, I descended the 4 floors that separated me from the ground. When I finally touched solid ground with my bare feet on the wet asphalt, I looked up and saw my home engulfed in flames. The living room windows exploded as I watched, throwing glass and fire into the night like a macabre fireworks display. The smoke was so thick I could barely see the sky, and the heat reached me where I stood, more than 20 meters away, drying my tears before they could fall down my cheeks. The firefighters arrived 15 minutes later. By then, the apartment was unrecognizable. Everything I had built, decorated with love, prepared for my son, had turned to ashes. Mene's crib, his clothes carefully folded, the photo albums from my wedding, my childhood, all the people I loved, everything was gone. A paramedic wrapped me in a thermal blanket as I trembled on the sidewalk, unable to look away from the disaster. He asked me if I was hurt, if I could breathe well, if the baby was moving. I nodded mechanically to everything, feeling his reassuring little kicks against my ribs, the only sign that something good still existed amidst so much destruction. It was then that a firefighter approached with a grave expression. "Ma'am, we found the point of origin of the fire," he told me. "It was arson. Someone sprayed gasoline on your door and lit it." The world stopped. The sound of sirens, the voices of curious neighbors, the crackling of what remained of my home, everything disappeared, replaced by a deafening buzz in my ears. "We also found this," the firefighter continued, showing me an evidence bag. It was in the hallway near the origin of the fire. Inside the bag was a golden lighter with the initials VM engraved. Valentina Marquez. What followed were weeks of police statements, court appearances, and a media circus that turned my personal tragedy into public entertainment. Valentina was arrested 24 hours after the fire. They found her in her apartment, the one Rodrigo had been paying for years, with her hands still smelling of gasoline and a disturbing smile that the officers described as disconnected from reality. During the interrogation, she confessed everything without showing the slightest remorse. She said she had planned the fire for weeks, that she had patiently waited for me to become confident, to lower my guard. She said her intention had been to kill me, kill us, me and the baby she saw as the consolidation of everything Rodrigo had promised her and then taken away. "She stole everything from me," she declared, before the interrogation room camera, with a calm that chilled the blood. It was only fair that I take everything from her too. The prosecution charged her with attempted first-degree murder of 2 victims, me and my unborn child. They also charged her with arson, property damage, and a list of minor charges that included harassment and threats. Her lawyer tried to plead mental illness, arguing that the breakup with Rodrigo had led her to a state of temporary psychosis. But forensic psychiatrists determined that Valentina was perfectly sane, resentful, obsessed, dangerous, but sane. Each of her acts had been carefully calculated, premeditated, executed with a precision that ruled out any loss of contact with reality. The trial lasted 3 months. I had to testify, facing her gaze from the stand, reliving every moment of terror so the jury would understand what she had done to me. Rodrigo also testified, publicly admitting his infidelity, his cowardice, his responsibility in the spiral of madness that had led Valentina to that point. It was humiliating. It was exhausting, but it was also cathartic. Valentina was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. When the judge read the verdict, she screamed that this wasn't over, that someday she would get out and finish what she had started. The bailiffs had to drag her out of the room while I held my 8-month belly, feeling Mateo's kicks as a reminder of everything I had almost lost. Mateo was born 1 month after the verdict on a clear spring night at 3 a.m. The delivery was long and painful, 18 hours of contractions that made me scream and cry and swear I would never go through this again. But when they finally put him in my arms, when I saw his dark eyes looking at me with a curiosity that seemed impossible for a newborn, all the pain disappeared. He weighed 3 kilograms and 400 grams. He measured 51 centimeters. He had his father's dark hair and, according to my mother, my turned-up nose. He was perfect, absolutely, irrevocably perfect. And he was mine. The first months of motherhood were overwhelming. I was living temporarily with my mother 500 kilometers from the city where everything had happened, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. I had no job, no home of my own, nothing except the alimony Rodrigo deposited punctually each month, and the unconditional love of the woman who had given me life. Rodrigo came to visit Mateo every 2 weeks, complying with the visitation schedule we had agreed upon. Our interactions were cordial but distant, 2 strangers united by a son who hadn't asked to come into this world full of drama and pain. I never forgave him for the infidelity. I never forgave the lies, the deceit, the way he made me feel small and paranoid for suspecting what turned out to be absolutely true. But I also didn't let resentment consume me. I had more important things to focus on than hating a man who no longer meant anything to me. When Mateo was 6 months old, I got a job. It was as an elementary school teacher, just like before I got married, at a small school on the outskirts of the town where my mother lived. The salary was modest, but enough, and more importantly, it gave me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever. A year after the fire, I bought my own house. Small, just 60 square meters. But mine. I decorated it with bright colors and second-hand furniture, not seeking the perfection that had obsessed me before. I hung photos of Mateo on every wall, filling the space with his toothless smile, his first steps, his bright eyes discovering the world. It was a home, a real home, built not on the ashes of the past, but on the foundations of a future I had chosen myself. I won't lie to you, healing wasn't easy. It wasn't a linear or romantic process. There were nights when I woke up drenched in sweat, still smelling the smoke, still feeling the heat of the flames approaching. There were days when the anxiety was so paralyzing I could barely get out of bed, convinced something terrible was about to happen. I sought help. I found a wonderful therapist who helped me process the trauma, understand that the fear I felt was a normal response to an abnormal experience, and develop tools to not let that fear control my life. I also found a community. Other single mothers, other survivors of domestic violence and stalking, other women who had been through hell and come out the other side. We met once a week at a community center, shared our stories without judgment, supported each other on difficult days. I learned that strength doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and moving forward anyway. It means getting up every morning, even when your body wants to give up. It means choosing life, joy, hope, even when everything seems to indicate you should choose darkness. Mateo turned 3 last month. He is a cheerful, curious child, full of inexhaustible energy that sometimes leaves me exhausted and always leaves me in awe. He has an overflowing imagination, a generous heart, and a contagious laugh that lights up any room he enters. When he's older, I'll have to tell him the truth about how he came into the world. I'll have to explain why his mom and dad don't live together, why I sometimes wake up screaming at night, why there's a woman in prison who tried to end our lives before he was even born. But I will also tell him about love, about how his existence saved me, gave me a reason to fight, forced me to be stronger than I ever thought possible. I'll tell him that his name means gift of God, and that's exactly what he is to me. I thought my story had ended, that I had finally found peace, that the past was where it should be behind me. But yesterday, while preparing dinner for Matteo and me, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. 11 years have passed. I have 14 left. I still think of you every day. Don't forget. The number was from the prison where Valentina is incarcerated. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped the phone on the floor. The panic I thought I controlled returned like a giant wave, threatening to drown me. I looked at Matteo playing quietly with his toy cars in the living room, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I took a deep breath. Once, twice, 3 times. I remembered my therapist's words. You can't control what others do or say. You can only control how you respond. I blocked the number, saved the message as evidence just in case. And then I did something I had never done before. I wrote Valentina a reply that I will never send, but that I needed to get out of my system. Dear Valentina, I'm still here. My son is still here. We are happy. We have a beautiful life that you tried to destroy and couldn't. You can think of me all you want. You can hate me, curse me, plan revenge you will never be able to execute. But the truth is, I don't care about you anymore. For a long time I gave you power over me. I let you live in my head rent-free, stealing my sleep, my peace, my ability to feel safe in my own skin. But that's over. Today I choose to free myself from you. Today I choose to let go of the rage, the fear, the resentment that tied me to that horrible night. Today I choose to move forward, not because I forgive you, but because I deserve a life not defined by what you did to me. I hope someday you find the peace you so desperately need, and I hope that when you get out of prison old and worn out, you discover that the world kept turning without you, that the people you wanted to destroy flourished despite everything, and that the only legacy you left was becoming a footnote in other people's stories of overcoming. With the indifference you deserve, Elena. Almost 4 years have passed since that nightmare night. 4 years since I breathed smoke while my baby kicked inside me, begging for clean air. 4 years since I saw my entire life reduced to smoldering rubble. But 4 years of reconstruction have also passed, of small daily victories, of learning to trust again, to love again, to believe again in the possibility of a bright future. I am not the same woman who met Rodrigo at that wedding so long ago. That woman was naive, dependent, desperate to find validation in a man's eyes. The woman I am today is different, stronger, wiser, with scars I don't hide because they remind me of everything I survived. Love still scares me, relationships, intimacy, the vulnerability of giving your heart to someone who could shatter it. All of that is still a minefield for me, but I'm learning. Step by step, day by day, I'm learning to open up again without losing myself in the process. A few months ago I met someone. His name is Daniel. He's a teacher at the same school where I work, and he has the patience of a saint. I didn't tell him anything about my past at first. I waited to see if he was worthy of that trust. When I finally told him everything, with tears running down my cheeks and my hands trembling on the cafe table, he simply took my hands in his and said, "That explains a lot about the incredible woman you are today." I don't know if Daniel and I have a future together. I don't know if I will ever dare to marry again, to give my life to another person in that way, but I know I deserve the chance to find out. I deserve the chance to be loved properly by someone who chooses me and only me, without secrets, without lies, without hidden lovers waiting to set my world on fire. Matteo is my greatest treasure. Every night before sleeping he tells me he loves me to the moon and beyond, a phrase he learned from a children's book, and that is now our sacred ritual. Every morning he wakes me up with wet kisses and endless questions about the world, about dinosaurs, about why the sky is blue and clouds are white. It's because of him that I keep going. It's because of him that I refuse to let myself be defined by the worst that has happened to me. It's because of him that I write this story, not as an exercise in victimhood, but as a testimony of survival. Because if I learned one thing from the flames that almost consumed me, it is this: fire can destroy houses, belongings, material memories. It can reduce years of work to ashes in a matter of minutes. But there are things fire cannot touch. It cannot burn the love I feel for my son. It cannot burn my determination to build a better life. It cannot burn the hope that, against all odds, still burns within me. Valentina wanted to destroy me. She wanted to erase me from the map, eliminate my existence as if it had never mattered. But she failed. She failed because she underestimated the strength of a mother protecting her child. She failed because she didn't understand that some fires, instead of destroying, purify. Today I am more myself than I ever was. Today I live without asking permission, without seeking external validation, without needing a man to complete me because I am already complete on my own. Today I look to the future not with fear but with curiosity, wondering what good surprises await me around the corner. And if someday Valentina fulfills her threat to come looking for me when she gets out of prison, I'll be waiting for her, not with fear, but with the absolute certainty that she can no longer hurt me, because the worst that could happen already happened, and here I am, breathing, living. Here I am. If you are going through something similar, if you feel like the world is collapsing around you and you see no way out, I want you to know something: you are stronger than you think. You have within you a reserve of courage you don't even know exists, until you need it. Seek help. You don't have to face this alone. There are emergency hotlines, shelters, organizations that exist specifically to support women in situations of violence and stalking. There are people who will believe you, who will protect you, who will help you rebuild. And above all, don't let anyone tell you that you deserve what is happening to you. You don't deserve abuse. You don't deserve threats. You don't deserve to live in fear. You deserve a life full of peace, of true love, of authentic joy. You deserve to be reborn from the ashes, like the phoenix. You deserve to live. If you identified with this story, if it made you reflect, feel emotional, or simply kept you company during these minutes, I invite you to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope, share it. You never know who you might be helping with just a click. Until the next story.